My name is Hannah. My name is Hannah. I grew up in a Christian home. I went to a Christian school and I basically just loved the Lord all my life. It was kind of cool. He had always just kind of pursued me from like a very young age. I think one of the first times that I realized that he was like powerful and real and tangible was when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. And I was at like a summer camp, and I remember there was like this altar call and just feeling his presence all over me to the point where like I could feel like my insides just shaking, and there was something in that moment that he became so real to me, and that was in like 3rd grade. In high school, everyone was kind of deciding what they wanted to do after high school, what college they wanted to go to, all that kind of stuff, and I had known since I was in 7th grade that I wanted to do YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission. I knew the Lord and I had a relationship with him, but I didn't really know who I was in all of that. And so I decided I wanted to go to YWAM, kind of stretch my limits. I was a very shy person. I didn't talk to anyone, so it kind of scared me a lot. But I decided that I felt the Lord call me to do it, so that's what I was going to do. I went and did a discipleship training school in YWAM in South Africa. We had 3 months of lectures, and so in those 3 months, I think that was kind of the lead up to where we were just kind of taught about healing, miracles, prophecy, all that kind of stuff, just kind of the basics. And we really worked on like our identity and who we were in him and getting to actually know the person of Holy Spirit. It was 3 months of the Lord just so pursuing me and being like, this is who you are, this is what I've said you are, you're this, this, and this, you're prophetic, you're discerning. The feelings that you've been feeling, here's words for them. In that season came a lot of just encouragement, which led to boldness and courage and all that kind of stuff. So I think those 3 months were really kind of like a setup until when we actually went out onto outreach and started actually praying for people and all that kind of stuff. So we went to Johannesburg for the first 2.5 to 3 weeks. And in Johannesburg, we did a lot of just street ministry where we would go out to the streets and just do a lot of children's ministry, do a lot of VBSs. Every day we would go to the park and just really love on the kids because their parents would send the kids to the park, just with like the 5-year-old would be taking their 2-year-old little sister to the park by themselves, and that's what they would do all day, and the 5-year-old just had to take care of the 2-year-old. So these kids didn't know love. They just had to grow up really fast, and so we just made it our goal to like love on them as much as we could. And there was one day that my friend was across the way at the park, and she had 2 little boys sitting on her lap, and there was one sitting next to her. And I just heard the still small voice of the Lord, like just heard him say like, hey, you should go hang out with that little kid over there. And I was like, okay. So I walk over and I go and I pick up this little boy and I sit him on my lap. And he was probably about 5 years old. And he's sitting on my lap and I'm just like tickling him and like being silly and trying to make him laugh. And this kid wouldn't budge, like not even a smile, not a laugh, nothing. And so I'm sitting there with this little boy on my lap and I'm like, oh my gosh, something has been so traumatic in his life to where his joy has been taken from him to the point, like a 5-year-old not being able to smile is like insane. And so I'm sitting there and I just start praying for him, and I had my hand on his back and on his chest as he's facing this way. And I'm just praying for him, just like, I didn't even know what to pray, but I was like, Jesus, he needs you. And as I had my hands on him, I realized on his chest, the best way I can describe it was like he had just like a plate in his chest, so there was no ribs, there was no muscle, just nothing. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is not normal either. And so I'm like, what the heck, Jesus? So I start in my head, and at that point, I kind of had just said this like half-hearted prayer for like, oh, Jesus, would you heal him? Because I believed in it. It wasn't that I didn't believe in it. I just never really thought that he would heal through me. And so it was just kind of this half-hearted thing. I wasn't like just like going after it. It was just like a simple little like, Jesus, would you heal him? And I took my hand off for a second and I put it back on his chest, and literally in those 2 seconds, new muscle and like ribs had regrown over his chest. And I'm sitting there just like freaking out because I'm like, this was not here before. Then the crazy part about it all too was I started playing with him a little bit more, and this kid started to bust up laughing. So in the matter of 2 minutes, Jesus had done complete physical and emotional healing right then and there. And it just showed me, I was just like so in awe that I'm like, he just did the whole package right then and there in 2 minutes, and I never even knew that he would ever do that kind of a thing through me. So that was pretty crazy. And it made my faith just like, okay, you can do a lot more than I thought you could. And I think the first time that I really like saw that he wanted to work through me was through the little boy that got healed with the ribs growing back, the ribs and the muscle growing back, because I wasn't contending for it. I wasn't even really asking for it, but it was just kind of like, oh yeah, you're willing, I want to use you, like, and it was just so simple. And it was a big shift in my life. Like, I think it did probably more for me than it did for the little kid. So after Johannesburg, we went to Pemba, Mozambique. We went to Iris Ministries to Heidi Baker's orphanage there. And while we were there, we were just asking them what we could do to serve. We came alongside of a bunch of her different ministries that she had set up throughout the week. And then one of the things that they asked us to do as a team was to paint some of the boys' rooms that they had there. And so the room that we were doing, it was painted blue before. We were just going to give it a fresh coat of paint and get it all nice for them again. And so they had brought us these big tubs of white paint, and then these small gallons of just like with colors. So we would mix the color and the white paint together. And so we were going to paint 3 of the walls a different shade of blue and then 1 wall yellow. So we painted all the blue walls. We had mixed the paint up and painted all of those. And then we got to the last wall that we were going to just like accent it with yellow, mixed up the paint, and we started painting. And we realized as we were painting the wall that it was going to need more than 1 coat. And because of that, we were kind of bummed because we're like, oh, we don't have enough paint mixed up and we can't mix more because it's going to be a completely different color. Plus, we don't even know if there's more yellow paint left. And so I was painting the wall, and I'm a perfectionist, and I just like doing things well. And I'm sitting there just kind of like grumbling, painting this wall, like, oh, I just want to do this well, but I can't. And I had used all the paint that was on my roller, and so it was really hot. We were painting in the middle of the day. Don't know why, but we were. And so I sat down to get a drink of water, and I had just used all the paint that was on my roller. And I'm sitting there drinking water, just kind of being like, ah, Jesus, like I want to do this well for them. And I just hear him say, like, Hannah, go pick up that roller. And I'm just like, okay. And so I go pick up the roller, and he's like, now put it on the wall. And there was no paint on this roller, and I was like, okay. I was like, what's the worst that could happen? I start rolling it on the wall, and as I'm rolling it, the wall just starts getting painted, and I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, like what the heck? So I yell over to my friend Haley, I'm like, Haley, look what's happening, and I'm like painting the wall. She's like, keep going. And so I'm going and I'm painting this wall, and we ended up painting the whole entire wall, and it ended up being perfectly painted. It didn't need a second coat, and we just had just enough amount of paint. And so that was pretty cool, and it was just cool to see that God cared enough about wanting to do something with excellence and knowing that that was my heart, and he wanted to honor me in that. He didn't have to, but he wanted to. After Mozambique, we went to Kenya for a month. And in Kenya, we were in another orphanage, and at that orphanage, we came in, and there was a bunch of people like cleaning rooms and all that kind of stuff, and my project was to paint they had kind of like a study room for the orphanage, and in that room, they wanted us to paint all of the edge work and then the tile floor and then the hallway leading up to the room. And the floor was already painted red, but they just wanted a fresh coat on it. And we're like, yep, totally can do that for you. So they come in and they bring me the paint, and there's less than a half of a gallon of paint. And I look at him and I was like, do you have any more paint? And he was like, oh, no, that's all we have. And I was like, well, that's not gonna cover it all. He's like, okay, just do what you can. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. But anyways, I was like, okay, this is what they want us to do. I'm gonna serve them in how they want to be, like, I'm just gonna do it. So we painted all of the edge work first. We just thought we'd just go around and do that. And then we started painting the tile floors. And so I had a really old nasty brush that I was painting with. It was probably about like this big and like this thick with like the bristles just like going everywhere. And I would stick it in the paint can and it would get maybe 2 tiles. And the tiles were probably about like that big. And it would maybe like get 2 tiles painted with like 1 dip of paint in the paint can. And so I'm sitting there painting and getting frustrated because we weren't gonna be able to paint the whole room. And I'm sitting there painting, just kind of grumbling to Jesus about it again. And he's like, Hannah, you know I've done this before, right? And I'm like, that you have? He's like, okay, this next time, he's like, we're doing 3 tiles. And I was like, okay. So I go and I start painting the tiles. I get to the second one and I was like, there is no way we're getting to the third one. But I was like, but you said to. So I go and I start painting the 3rd tile and I'm like, this is not gonna work. But I was like, okay, Jesus, you've done this before, I trust you. And so I start painting the 3rd tile. Somehow it gets painted and I'm like, you're pretty cool, okay. So I keep on, so I dip my paint brush in the paint can again and I'm like, okay, we'll just do 3 tiles again. And as I get to the 3rd, as I finish the 3rd one, he's like, okay, let's do 4. And I'm like, okay. And so I go and I start to paint the 4th one. I'm like, there is no way this is happening. And as I start painting the 4th one somehow gets painted. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, you're pretty cool. And so then I'm like, okay, we're gonna do 4 tiles at a time. I go and I get through the 4th one the next time around. And he's like, okay, now I want you to do 5. And I'm like, 5 tiles. And 5 tiles, mind you, is probably, it's a little less than half the span of the room with 1 dip of paint in the paint can with a really bad brush. And I'm like, okay. And so I go and I get through the 4th one and I get to the 5th one and I start painting it and I'm like, there is no way. And as I start, I just am watching this paint, just like paint this tile. And I'm like, we literally just painted 5 tiles together. And I'm like, okay. And so I started painting 5 tiles at a time. And we go through the whole entire room. We paint the whole entire room, all of the edge work, and then the whole entire hallway leading up to it. And then we had paint left over, which is the crazy part. And it's just kind of like he works in abundance. That's who he is. He's never lacking it, and he did it just to honor my heart for just wanting to do things well, and knew that that was what would bless me in the fact of it all. We were going around house to house, just doing door-to-door ministry, just praying for people. And there was this one lady that we walked up to, and she was outside doing her dishes. And we were just talking to her, and we're like, is there anything that you need prayer for? And she's like, yeah. She was a widow. She had 3 children and didn't have a job. And she's like, my daughter's deaf. She can't hear. And she's like, would you pray for her? And we're like, absolutely, of course. So they bring her out, and me and my friend from Spain are just praying over her. And it was the craziest thing where we just like had this faith in us that we knew that God was going to heal her. She didn't get healed right then and there. And we're like, okay, but we didn't leave discouraged, but we kind of left just knowing like he's the healer, he's going to do it. Like we had no doubt. The next day we're walking through the same village again, and we had an interpreter with us the whole time. And we saw the girl that we had prayed for the day before walking through the village just a little ways out. And our translator remembered her name and yelled out her name. And her back was to us. And she turns around and just looks at us with this huge smile and just walks away. She didn't come towards us. She doesn't come like talk to us. She just like smiled because she had heard us call her name, and she had been completely healed. And then just had walked away, and we just like, our mouths just like dropped of just like Jesus totally healed her and just like opened up her ears. So that was pretty cool too. Over our lecture phase, there was one day that we were just having like a worship night, and for some reason I looked down at my hands, and I looked at them, and I was just kind of looking at them, and on my hands was just it was kind of like sparkly dust. It didn't necessarily look gold, but it was just like all sparkly. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I've heard about this stuff before. So I started washing my hands, rubbing them off on everything, and it wouldn't like leave my hands. I was just like, okay, Jesus, this is cool. I don't really know what to do with this, but this is kind of cool. I kind of would look at my hands whenever I would pray for someone. They would get really hot, and then I would see just like the gold dust like start coming on my hands. And I would pray for those people, and every time like I saw that and my hands got hot and the gold dust was there and I would pray for someone, that person got healed. So it was kind of just this funny little thing that God did that I don't really know why he did it or why he does it, but it's just kind of just, there's things about God that he's so big and so massive that you can't even put him in a box of like, oh, he's this way and he's this way and he wouldn't do this and he wouldn't do that. But it's just being like, okay, Jesus, you can do whatever you want. If you want to put gold dust on my hands, you can. And it's kind of fun. Coming home, it was different because people believe different things as well, like, oh, Jesus doesn't heal, or I believe Jesus heals, but he just wouldn't do it here, or he wouldn't do it for me. And so I've just kind of made it a part of my lifestyle. Like when my friend has a headache, I'll just go over and pray for their head and their headache will leave. Or like if you have a sickness, just praying for them to get healed, and sometimes they get healed. I've prayed for a lot of people's backs actually, and most of the time they get healed. And it's become such a normal part of my life that I think sometimes I forget how good he is in it all. Because it's just who he is, it's his nature, it's what we've been called to do. Jesus said that like we would do greater things than he ever did. So it should be our normal to see the sick being healed every day. It should be our normal to be prophesying and getting words of knowledge and all that kind of stuff. There was one day that my back, I had been having a lot of lower back issues. And my best friend, we were hanging out one night, and for some reason I asked my friend, I was like, do you want to see if my legs are like different lengths? And she was like, yeah, because she totally is believe in all this kind of stuff and walks in healing and all that kind of stuff. And so I sat up against the wall and I stuck my legs out, and we noticed that one of my legs was a little bit shorter than the other. And she's like, okay, let's pray for it. And so we're sitting there, we're just like praying for my leg like it's normal to pray for someone's leg to grow out. And we just like watched my leg just kind of like grow out. And like instantly there was relief in my back at that moment. And we're like, okay, we like thanked God for it and then just like went on about our day. And then like a couple weeks later, she was like, hey, Hannah, do you remember when we prayed for your leg to grow out and it like grew out? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So it's become so normal and so simple. It doesn't have to be this big production. It's just a simple, like, I'm gonna lay my hand on you and pray for you to get healed. And God's the healer and he like loves to heal. So it's been cool seeing it here as well. If you are someone that is wanting to move in just the more of him, I think the biggest thing is to know who you are. Before you go and you're trying to do all this stuff for him, I think the biggest thing is knowing that you're his, knowing that you're made complete in him, knowing that Jesus' last prayer was that we would be one with him. And one does not mean like, oh, you're here and I'm here. It's literally one, like hand in hand, he's in me. But if you don't know who you are, if you don't know that you're loved, if you don't know that all of his desires for you and his heart for you, you're gonna be acting out of just this striving. And that's not who Jesus is, and it's not loving, it's not fully what he's called you to be. And there's something about knowing his heart for you that changes everything, and it makes the risk and it makes the stepping out like so simple and easy. Not that it's necessarily the most fun all the time, but it's like, I know his heart for me and I want people to know his heart for me just the way that I know him. And so it's that simple, just like going to him and being like, hey, like, what do you think of me? Like, where are you in this? I want to know your heart in this. And from that place, it just starts to come out of you. It just starts to become your natural and your normal. And yes, it takes a bit of risk. And yes, you will mess up, or it won't work, or all that. But when you know his heart and when you know depth of his love for you, and I don't even know fully his love, but like the more and more of the glimpses that I get, the harder it is to not want to like serve him and to love on people and to go after that. It doesn't have to be going and praying for all the deaf people that you see. It could just be simply hearing him say, go tell that person that I love them, or go tell that person something that you love about them, and giving him your simple yes of just the simple things of life. It doesn't have to be huge and big and massive and always watching legs grow out, but simply just loving on people and starting from there and going from there. And he just starts to honor that, and you start to get more and more courage as you just start off with the little things, and you get a little bit more like, okay, he did this, so I can go a little farther. But don't be so hard on yourself because I think a lot of us are so hard on ourselves, and he is so honored by just our simple yes.